Assalamu alaikum again, everyone. I think I didn't record the first part. I hope you're all doing well. This is my video response to Cosmic Skeptic's video on Islam, why Islam is so sensitive. And I'm not used to do this type of video answering to people like him, because I think there are already a lot of da'is, a lot of other Muslims and even non-Muslims doing a pretty good job answering the misconception that he had in the video. But they were so big this time, and they really showed, like, to me, they represented an intellectual tap out by Alex O'Connor, and this is why I really wanted to respond. And hopefully this can be beneficial to either Muslims, non-Muslims, or guys who debate, and maybe can take some inspiration. I took some notes, so I might not look directly at the screen, because this is how I do things. I really cannot come up with things at the spur of the moment, but you want to forgive me for that small thing, and let's go through it. So the way we'll do it is just that I would criticize and respond really to Alex's points using my notes and without really showing the video because of lack of technical expertise and so on. But you can see his video. I mean, as I said, is the video published recently on why is Islam so sensitive. So the main thread for the video, first of all, is that it's full of mystification and emotionalism. He starts by making a false claim, and I mean, what I would say it's a red herring. He says that Islam is sensitive in a way which really reminds of Trump mistaking Islam for a country. When he said, "You're from Islam." So he said, "Hey, Islam says that, Islam says X, Y, and Z, and so on." Now, first of all, Alex has no formal training whatsoever on Islamic jurisprudence and theology, and yet he claims to speak on behalf and about the whole complex religion of Islam. Complex when it comes to, jurisprudence and so on. Rather, in a video, he should have said Muslims or some Muslim countries, which he doesn't. Even then, he claims that Islam, but let's assume that he really meant Muslims or some Muslims, are sensitive to criticism, which is not true at all. We're sensitive to mockery, to gratuitous mockery, yes, of course, but not to criticism, and this will be the main thread toward the video. He constantly moves the goalpost between mockery and criticism, confusing the two, and his minions, of course, in the comment section just clap their hands like monkeys, because, he's really doing this sort of mystification whereby at the end, mockery and criticism become the same thing, which they are not. He claims that the question at hand is perennial, and it's so clear, the question of Islamic hypersensitivity to criticism, i.e. mockery, and that if he did a video saying the similar thing for Jews, for Judaism, we would say, what are you talking about? There is no such an issue. And therefore, there is an issue. Because everybody's talking about this issue, That's obviously a big non sequitur. It's so big that it is as big, this is the example I had, as big as the black hole TON 618, which is the biggest one that we've observed so far. And yes, it is very huge. Because everyone who has a minimum of intellectual honesty knows that Islam has been attacked since the beginning of the century by media because of the justification of the so-called war on terror, which led, by the way, to the destruction of many countries in the Middle East and the death of millions of Muslims by the bloody hands of the civilized, quote-unquote, Western powers, and to, of course, have some gains in the Middle East and try to get petrol and have either use Muslims as political tokens in the West to have, to scare voters and have advantages, and to be elected, or to just go and justify the destruction in the Middle East and get oil, basically. This is it's a summary really of what the academia and what really goes on when we talk of this issue, of why the Islamophobia. And in fact, the Islamophobia industry and its impact and influence based on lies has been widely denounced and attested in academia, and even if it was not, which by the way it is, it obviously does not follow that because everybody speaks about Muslims or Islam in a negative way, then there must be an issue. But this is just the beginning. There's much more intellectual really dishonesty and intellectual tapping out that is coming. He goes on with another fallacy and a non sequitur, misinterpreting the action of a Shia government, which, by the way, is theological and non-stream sect of Islam, which instead is the Sunni Islam. And then to add to that, he basically confuses what is the position of a political regime as the theological position of Islam, and he denounces the demand of Iran for an extrajudicial killing against Salman Rushdie, this author, which is, of course, it is like saying that all the people that the US has killed extrajudicially with drones and so on, including the children which were killed and which were denounced by websites like WikiLeaks and I believe also Snowden. He also denounced that basically children were killed and dismembered. Some of them, you can see the videos when they were published, when they were published in WikiLeaks. They were attending a funeral, and there were women and civilians and children that were dismembered in body parts. This is what the extrajudicial killing of US did in the Middle East. And it's like saying, hey, this is what Christianity teaches, which is, of course, would be crazy. Well, he does that with Islam. At this point, you might think the guy claims he studies philosophy, but you might be wondering what philosophy and critical thinking he studied. Well, that's a question for another story, but obviously not enough. He then denounced the violent popular uprising which occurred in Iran, maybe even elsewhere, against Salman Rushdie's book, which trying to pass them off. Connor tried to pass them off as the position of Islam, equating in the most gullible or maybe even the most dishonest manner how popular masses react versus what their ideology actually teaches about how they should react or what the reaction should be. Let's take the example of blasphemy in Islam. If you go today to a Muslim country like Morocco, which, by the way, it has ulama, it has scholars, Muslim scholars, you'll be condemned to prison. There was a recent case where a girl was condemned, and even when it was more of a political move, to be honest. So you really want to see when it's politically oriented, when it's religiously justified. But again, this girl was this teenager, because of a blasphemy, she was sentenced to, I think, 2 to 3 years of prison plus some money to be paid. And by the way, in Morocco, Islam is the religion of state by constitution there, and we're talking about Sunni Islam. So you really gonna ask Connor, what state are you gonna take? What Muslim or Islamic state are you gonna take for your comparisons and false analysis? Because it's really what it is. Well, if you keep and then what I was saying is that he confuses the reaction of the masses between the reaction of governments. So even then there is even the reaction of the actual ulama, which is the highest level. So if you keep blaspheming on the street, and people are gonna jump at you. It's normal. If you go to Morocco, you blaspheme the Prophet, you blaspheme Islam, the Quran, and God, you're gonna be jumped on and they're gonna assault you. Is it right? No, but they're gonna do it. That's one thing, one reality. And that's what would happen in any other country where you offend what they hold most sacred and most dear, even if it wasn't religiously oriented. Maybe it's the state. And that's without any regard and with only the purpose of offending. So if you go around offending, that's what's gonna happen, But it doesn't follow that this is the position of the religion, even if it was a government policy, which Connor claim is Islamic. Why? Because you gotta look at what the primary texts say, what the scholar of Islam say, which Islamic scholar you go with, which school of thought you go with, and of course Alex is totally ignorant and uneducated over all of this. So let's continue now. Okay, of course, you would think this is already serious enough and bad enough for Alex, but you would not believe the conclusion he still has to get to. He says, of course, that you can love whomever you want, which is gonna evolve in his position into a pro-LGBT stance in his video, but then amazingly he claims that Islam obliges others to love Allah and the Prophet like this as well, because in Islam we believe we love God and the Prophet more than ourselves. We're ready to sacrifice our life. Theologically, we should aim to that goal, to that spiritual level, We have clear textual evidence for this attitude that a Muslim should have, this ghira, this jealousy of our religion and what we hold sacred. And he says that Islam imposes this sort of love on others, which is totally nonsense. You will not find any of this to others, any sort of proof about this. The Quran teaches that there is no constriction in religion. It even uses the fatha in the Quran. It does not even know what I'm talking about. I mean, this is just Arabic balagh, Arabic rhetoric and grammar. You know, you can say in Arabic, ikrahun. There is no constriction with the hun. I will just speak with people who really understand. You can use the fatha tanween. Sorry, the dhamma tanween, la ikrahun. Or you can use the fatha and say la ikraha. So the accusative form, you could say. And in the first case, you would say that there is no constriction, but there might be exceptions. And in the second case, which is the one that is always used in the Quran when it comes to the idea of constricting others to believe something, it uses the fatha, which is what precludes any sort of ad hoc scenarios. So the translation will be, you can never ever oblige anyone to the religion. You know, la ikraha, there is no at all any sort of constriction in the religion. And then you gotta, of course, combine it with other things, about other things like what happens during apostasy, what are the positions, and so on. But let's see. Of course, the Quran teaches so that there is no constriction in the religion, but at the same time, Islam, it's not a religion for hippies. You know, it's not like the Buddhism where we just stick around with their hands and their legs spread out and we just sit closing our eyes and imagining things. No, it is pragmatic, and it does foresee its role in the political sphere in an Islamic state. Now, I use this word Islamic state. It's not really the most accurate word, because you would have to say authority, because a state is a modern reality, but just give it to me for this video, you know, grant it to me. Let's just say state for the sake of argument, of which constitution and thus the social contract upon which the society's stability and justification for the existence of the society itself is founded. Now, if a Muslim lives in a non-Muslim country, constitutionally, so for example in a secular country, and if that country offers tools to protect minorities, we are going to use those tools fully to protect what we love, and we're surely not going to do what Alex would want Muslims to do, which he claims in the video, which is basically to say, to be okay with the fact that everyone offends us gratuitously, and not only us personally, because we can go on with that, but to offend what we hold most sacred, even than our own lives and the lives of our own parents. So it's not the criticism we're talking about here. We are very open to that. We love criticism. Oh, trust me, we love it. But it's an offense. We're talking about gratuitous attacks and mockery deriving from a perverted idea of freedom of speech, which Alex seems to pervertly adopt, and which even other secular atheists don't agree with. So the response to that is clear. No. And if you do that in a Muslim country, you will be punished. And if Muslims live in a state which claims to protect minorities, we will protect ourselves. And if that state give us democratic means to do that, we will use them, like Alex LGBT's friends would do, and which he claims to support in his video, and who, by the way, are sometimes, I want to be honest, not always, forcing with violent policies their vision and ideology everywhere, obliging people to use certain pronouns or to accept the idea of gender and so on. This is something that as Muslims we do not agree with. But Alex, they seem to have done a pretty good job at submitting him, and he is a Muslim to them in that case, you know. And we will get back to this issue later on. Respectfully, of course, but I want to really be clear, you know. He then shows a footage of Ali Dawa, a famous YouTuber, Muslim YouTuber, and he talks about who talked in the video. And by the way, he takes a very short piece of the video, not the whole thing, which is related to another context of other debates that happened. But I mean, Alex has already done so bad. I mean, this is nothing really. So in the video, Ali Dawa, in that cutted part of the video, he talks about the capital punishment for blasphemy in Islam without knowing, of course, all how they work at all. He takes the claim of a YouTuber without going to a scholar or without looking at the positions of the scholar and without let's just go step by step. Ali Dawa was talking about the very unlikely situation where capital punishment is enacted by a caliph, for instance, you know, in a Muslim state, let's use this term, and with all the conditions being met, which are not few and are not easy to prove. Now, Islam's jurisprudence is not a dead machine. It's not a capitalistic machine. It is a live organism, and it considers deeply the context in which it lives, the case-by-case scenarios, and today it would have to consider the applicability of such a punishment, which is still to be discussed by Muslim scholars, because we do not have any official Islamic authority or khilafah. We do not have, I mean, Muslims not having a caliphate is like Christians not having a pope, It's a bad example, but it gives you the idea, because of the cultural gap. Maybe like this you will understand. So where were we? Okay, so when you do read the texts, the Islamic texts, you will see that even pre-modernity, we're talking about instances of repeated offenses which really were aimed at being instances of uprising against the Muslims' authority. There's not much to be said here, to be honest. We're not talking about what to do within states whose constitutions is not based on Islamic jurisprudence. We're not talking about the conditions of applicability. We're not even making a comparison between similar punishments in history and even today for similar crimes. We're not making the historical comparison, both in the past and today, about similar crimes like offense and attacks against the states, which we know are there, and they are even sanctions, by the way. So Alex falls with the whole bath tube into the hole. And what does he fall into? What is this hole? It is the hole of atheistic emotionalism. He assumes that atheistic secular relativism is true. He accepts as true a punishment, which is the capital punishment for a certain form of blasphemy. He takes it from the hadith tradition of Islam, which is correct, which is preserved. It is not in the Quran, but it is there, without considering the rest of similar narrations, like the miracles and the prophecies, which are even more trustworthy historically when it comes to the chain of narrations, and whose chain of narration is even stronger. And he's using that to show the capital punishment in Islam is there for apostasy, which, by the way, during the life of the Prophet was suspended as well in certain conditions, with certain treaties with other non-Muslims, where there was no war, and it just runs emotionally without any logical argument whatsoever. So the example of the hadith was taken also by Farid Response. I really want to stay 30 seconds on this. This is literally like staying in front of the Prophet. Like, this is the historic approach. You see the miracle, you see the prophecy, you see another miracle, you see another prophecy, you see another miracle, you see another prophecy, and then the Prophet comes and says, look, you've seen this stuff. You know how this is serious, and you know that morality by God is something serious. You have a higher standard now because you know this religion is true. By the way, we have other prophecies and miracles which is not only historically bound, which we can see today in the Quran and the Sunnah. And then you say, look, Prophet, astaghfirullah, may God forgive us. These miracles are amazing, but I'm gonna ignore that and actually focus just on that punishment that you're talking about, which is very serious. You have to take the whole thing together. If you know that something happened historically which is extraordinary, if you read the Quran, you know that the standard has been that once you have miracles and proofs, then the standard increases. And then there is a door, a pathway for God to say, now you know it's true, now you know how serious it is, the standard is higher, the punishment is higher, And even then you have excuses in Islam. But of course, he ignores them. Alex ignores them. I would say really intentionally or non-intentionally. It doesn't really seem to be as intellectually nuanced as to have done it intentionally, he was wanting. It's just full-fledged ignorance of Islam. Now the rest of the video is really baby ranting without any arguments. There are just a couple of points which we're going to address, but then that's all. One thing worth noting, for instance, is the question of Islam and the freedom of speech. And the answer is that Islam does not foresee the freedom of speech that he's thinking about, where you go around offending others even if they were polytheists, which, by the way, is the most false and offensive thing even in Islam. And even more than every other serious crime. Polytheism is the top of crimes, spiritually mainly, but if you cannot offend polytheists, you cannot surely offend others. He is a secular atheist. He believes in full freedom of speech, which is unbounded almost, although he would bound it when it comes to offending other people. Then he's the one who should not care in that case about what Muslims say, as long as he can do what he wants, freedom of speech. Of course, we see the bad effects that this interpretation, the perverted, I would say, interpretation, which, to be honest, even seculars, educated seculars, would not agree with. So we see the effect that this interpretation is having on secular society, which are crushed by the weight of this false freedom, which is actually a yoke constituted by political correctness to which Alex fully submits when it comes to other minorities like LGBTs. And I just quote them in the video because he quoted them. I could quote other minorities. In Islam, the important thing is not to say whatever comes to your mind, but to promote true or beneficial or proper speech, even when it is criticism, of course. Islamic history is full of very heated debates in the Islamic empire and against the Islamic theology. And it was addressed overall with debates and refutations. And this is why today we have a crazy, anyone who is a Muslim is going to follow the debates intra-Muslim knows how crazy we are for refutation theories. For refutation. There is a refutation culture. Oh, the scholar refuted that one, the scholar refuted that one, and depending on the scholar that you choose to follow, you will have a position or the other. And scholars keep refuting themselves, and this is fine. So this is becoming a problem. The refutation culture is trickling down due to social media to the layman, which is not good. It causes division and problem. This is something we stays with the scholars, and then this is filtered down to the people who choose their position. But we stick to the idea when it comes to refutation and criticism, not offense. Criticism. We stick to the idea, and we want to promote in general in societies not a totally free dialogue. Freedom is not necessarily a value or a virtue. It is truth and justice and positive things which are a value, not freedom. Freedom could be a mean. Sometimes it could even be something which impairs us for reaching goodness. So we do not believe the freedom of a newspaper like Charlie Hebdo to offend without any structured argument or criticism is useful to society. So we do not want to have it in society. We will oppose it in every way possible. And of course, any state today has such laws whereby offending the state or turning your back, for example, in times of war, wins you a ticket to prison and a big fine, and a few decades ago it could get you killed with death penalty for the capital punishment. The rest of the video, he just rants and blasts against Zakir Naik, who, by the way, in those videos that he took, he was in a specific context, was explaining in simple terms to one of the audience in a few minutes a complex issue, and this is completely opposite to what Alex tries to explain very badly in half an hour, mind you, not just a few minutes, preparing allegedly thoroughly for the question for I don't know how many hours. Because the video is 30 minutes, you would suppose at least that he thought a bit about doing it, even though you don't know what he went through his head. But I mean, a few hours have to have gone into that video, right? Of course, he could not quote other Muslims who are interested to this question that he brought up, and who have done and would again would again thoroughly humiliate him, like Muhammad Hijab did, like Abdullah Andalusi did, and that's it. I mean, as for the LGBTs, which he keeps quoting in the video, he says that Muslims don't respect them. How can they not respect the LGBTs, but they want respect from themselves? I mean, the question is, what is respect? We do not, as Muslims, agree that we have to offend them or attack them physically on the street as individuals, as people. We don't go there and attack them. But we have a religion. We think it's true. We have an ideology. We deem it to be true. We have an objective moral standard. And we believe that the behavior is sinful, immoral, not natural, serious privation, or damaging to individuals and society, or whatever. And it is akin to other perversions which might be similar in Islam, in Islamic theological context, like bestiality, where you go by and have sexual interaction, God forbid, with animals, which, by the way, one of the atheists, which Muhammad Hijab debated with, claimed that it's fine, as long as the animal is not hurt, and you can confirm that the animal agrees. And that's atheism for you, and that's Alex's epistemic position, by the way. He would say, no, that's not necessarily true, because he would use utilitarian arguments, but, I mean, what are we talking about, right? Even if the whole world would support, for example, bestiality, we would still deem it as Muslim as a perversion. Even if you'd come up with a rainbow color for it, even if you'd have a community for it, and even if the whole fashion, the whole political spectrum would support it, we would still deem it as bad. And Alex would do the whole opposite, fully submitting, a real Muslim of the seculars, because of his lack of any objective morality as an atheist, whereby you can just change your morality like a pair of dirty underpants. This is all for this video. I believe it is more than enough. I also think this proves clearly that, like everyone who debated Islam, which you can see any structured high-level debate, and where Islam was presented intellectually and with proof, he also got refuted. Everyone else got refuted. And if you look at anyone who tried it, like engaging with criticism, not just offense, they failed thoroughly, and some of them, to save their face with their audience, are now ranting emotionally like Alex is doing. And to me, this is really a symbol and a sign of intellectual tap out. So thank you, Alex, for proving to us that you have nothing else to offer after being refuted. Have a nice day, and Salam alaykum.